Welcome to our session answering the question, can cities inspire human vitality? We know the world is urbanizing. Today, over 50% of the world lives in cities, and by 2050, around 70% of us will live in cities. Why? They're more productive, better quality of life, but we also know they pollute, they're expensive, they sprawl. The Priority Report points out that the rising cost of living is a topmost priority and concern, where climate change has also deepened in 2023. So how can cities inspire more human vitality? Brilliant couple of people here to answer this question. Janus Rostock, multi-award winning architect responsible for Dubai Opera District, Dubai Harbor, NEOM Regional Plan, Diplomatic Corridor in Riyadh, to name just a few. He was based in the Middle East for many years, returned to Copenhagen, missed this part of the world so much, he had to come back. And we also have Laurent Germain, who's a high-ranking civil servant in France, but he left the public sector in 2005 to work in industry. And he is responsible for growing and internationalizing major consulting and engineering groups. First Segula Technologies, which he headed for 5 years, and now Egis. So we're here to speak about livable urban spaces. We know they need green space, pedestrian zones. We know that cities are getting more dense every day because people are arriving every day. We need them to be smart and vertical. Let me ask you both, Janus, we'll start with you. What city do you think inspires human vitality?
I think there are a lot of cities that inspire human vitality. If you look at the livability index, of course, there are cities like Vienna that is ranking the highest right now in terms of livability. But you could also take Singapore, which is another example. So there are two different ends of the extreme in terms of cities.
Which do you prefer?
I prefer Singapore, to be honest. I like real megapolises. So big cities with lots of people, lots to do. Modern architecture, being an architect myself, to me is super inspiring.
Laurent, what about you? What city do you think inspires human vitality today?
So I will take the opposite option. I would say Vienna, which is some kind of a paradox, because Vienna is an aging city. But nevertheless, it's a very vital city. And why is it a very vital city? First of all, because 50% of the coverage of the surface of Vienna is green. Second reason, it's a very inclusive city, with the citizens taking part in the decisions of, I would say, the urbanization of the city. And maybe you don't know, but in the budget of the city of Vienna, every year you've got an amount dedicated to make sure that the public policies implemented in the cities take into account the interest of women and take into account the interest of other parts of the population. So it's a very inclusive city. And it's also a city very efficient in terms of public transportation and in terms of, I would say, fluidity of the traffic.
Interesting. So what is the project that you are the most proud of that speaks to this topic, Laurent?
I will come to Saudi Arabia. I'm very proud of what Egis Group is doing in Saudi Arabia. One of the most iconic projects we are delivering in Saudi Arabia is the Green Riyadh project. Basically, the project, and we are the project manager, the project is to plant 7 million trees to lead to a situation where the coverage in green, in vegetalization of the city of Riyadh, will be at 9% compared with the situation in 2020, when it was at 1%. It's really an iconic project, and it's a project that shows that the nature-based solutions in cities can provide a big impact. Basically, the nature-based solutions, they are 50% more cost-effective than gray solutions, and they can provide 28% more added value. So it's a little bit paradoxical that no more cities are implementing that kind of nature-based solutions, because they can provide a very important added value.
Is it hard to do that if you're retrofitting a city? Is it easier to do as you're building Riyadh like it's happening now?
Not really, because I mean, in some of the cities, like the city of Paris, for instance, we have Egis Group define the net zero strategy of the city, and definitely we have taken the opportunity of, part of the cities which was, I would say, not fully inhabited, in order to demolish and recreate green zones into a city, Paris, which everybody knows is very dense. But this was absolutely compulsory if you wanted the city to be more livable by 2050.
What project are you most proud of?
I could also mention the Green Riyadh. We actually wrote the regulation, so know them very well. What's interesting about Riyadh is that today, each person in the population has 1.7 square meters of green open space out there as part of the public realm. That number is going to increase to 28 square meters per person. If you compare to Vienna, we spoke about before, that is sitting up at 50 square meters. London is 40, Denmark or Copenhagen is 38 square meters. But what we've got to remember about Riyadh is that water is a precious resource. So of course we can't have as much green open space here as you may be able to have elsewhere. I'm very proud of Dubai Opera as a built project. So right now, Green Riyadh is being constructed. Dubai Opera and the Opera District for me is a turning point for myself in my career. It has given Dubai a cultural place that it didn't have before in terms of the performing arts. But also I think it's the holistic approach in terms of how you design cities and places. Having done both the master plan and the building itself, it allowed us to place the buildings in a way that they shaded the opera building itself. The opera is fully glazed, so that the building is shade. It also allowed us to capture the natural breeze, which means that we've extended the outdoor season in the vicinity of the opera by approximately 2 months.
Interesting. So between what months and what months is it an outdoor?
So it just means that the end of spring, turning close to summer, you can stay out longer, and just at the end of summer, you can start getting outside earlier.
Is it actually physically cooler because of what you've done?
It feels cooler because you have the natural breeze, but also because the outdoor spaces are shaded. If you add trees to that, the ambient temperature around trees is usually between 2 and 5 degrees lower than everywhere else. So that mix of buildings creating shade, generating a breeze, allows you to extend the season through natural means rather than trying to air condition the outside spaces.
Imagine we had an audience of urban planners here.
Yeah.
What's the single most important thing that you think that an urban planner should do with a city today, Laurent?
Well, I think resilience is very high on the agenda. Why? Because the climate phenomena that we are experiencing have nothing to do with what we experienced, I would say, a decade ago. So in the way we plan, in order we conceive, in the way we build, we need to take into account the climate data not of 10 years ago, but the climate data that's of the phenomenon that will happen. Maybe you don't know, but the most populated cities in 2100 will be Kinshasa, Dar es Salaam, Lagos, and they will have 17 million inhabitants, compared with today, Shanghai, Delhi, above 25 million. So we need to make sure that the infrastructure that we will build in this city, in the master plan, can resist, the climate phenomena that will, have an impact on these cities, which will be big. So I think, resilience is a key topic on the agenda when we are projecting ourselves in the cities of the future.
What would you add?
What would I add? Well, as an urban designer and architect, I think the creation of a strong narrative which gives a clear vision and identity for the project is really, really important. Daniel Burnham, who was a 19th century urban designer and architect, famously said, "Make no little plans, They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high, and work knowing that a noble logic diagram, once recorded, will never die, but long after we're gone, be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing intensity. So it's about creating that seed that allows these cities to continue. We have to remember that when we design cities, we're designing them for today, but we're also designing them for 200 years from now. So that's a huge responsibility, but it's also a great opportunity in terms of making sure that you design some places that have identity, and therefore making sure that the places we're creating are rooted in the place that they are at. So the genius loci, the spirit of the place, I think is incredibly important.
You know, there's this idea of the 10-minute city, and in the new cities and new parts of Riyadh, for example, there's an idea that you can live, work, play, all within 10 minutes. How realistic is that if you think about retrofitting one of our older cities, a city like Vienna that you mentioned, for example?
For me, the key word is verticality. Especially, in cities in Europe, like my city in Paris or Vienna, for instance. I mean, in Europe, we have only 5% of the high buildings, buildings above 50 meters. And with these buildings, you can have inside the same building, a mixed use. You can have, the shopping. You can have health facilities. You can have, of course, residential. That can help, of course, to add a lot of services and deliver the 10 minutes city while retrofitting the cities and of course welcoming also the flow of new inhabitants, because as you mentioned, the urbanization will not stop. It will accelerate in the next decades. So the only solution limiting artificialization of soil, try to reach the 10-minute cities objective and being sustainable is building cities more vertical.
Interesting. And how does that relate?
And by the way, NEOM is very iconic on that matter, because one of the objectives of NEOM is to limit the, of course, artificialization of the soil, and through the high-speed lane, achieve the 10 minutes city objective.
Interesting. So NEOM's an example, and I imagine Dubai might also be an example with the vertical.
Dubai is also an example of a vertical city. I think if we again take it back to Riyadh, there's a huge opportunity here around transit-oriented development, which we're also looking at as part of the Riyadh strategy. Once you start densifying around these public transport nodal points, it allows you to do something different, because the dependency on car will go down. The vision for Riyadh is to today, 95% of all trips in Riyadh are done by automobiles. And that's why we've got so much congestion out on the streets. The ambition is to bring that down.
Traffic in Riyadh? Never experienced that.
Just a little bit, yeah. So the intent here is to bring that down to around, I think it was 30%, and then...
By when?
By 2030, I believe. Okay. I can't remember.
Right, but soon.
Yeah, but soon. So this is all part of, it will take time to develop these transit-oriented developments, but they will be developed around the existing metro, and in that sense, increase the density in those areas.
So, part of the challenge is that post-COVID, our habits have changed, right? The world now doesn't always go to the office. If I think about parts of the world like my hometown, San Francisco, we're going through a tough time. 40% of downtown San Francisco is now unoccupied in terms of the commercial. Yet housing is insanely expensive, and it's very difficult to turn those offices into houses for all kinds of reasons. So give us a sense, Laurent, from your experience when you were back in public policy, of how we create a dynamic and faster system to help cities move quickly when circumstances change.
Well, I mean, the first thing to do is of course, to redefine a strategy and to redefine the master planning of the city and bring back new activities in these empty spaces inside the city. This is a wonderful opportunity to redefine the strategy in terms of economic development, in terms of housing, in terms of also, everything linked to cultural and so on, and to attract investments, because you need money in order to revitalize downtown, like San Francisco, and of course change the image that now this downtown San Francisco has in the public opinion. So first of all, you need to completely redefine the strategy, redefine the master plan, try to start new activities. Another example is Detroit. Detroit, 15 years ago, was almost a dead city. We were thinking about vitality. And thanks to new activities, in the tech industry, thanks to more services and cultural services, offerings, they have completely revitalized the downtown, Detroit. And now, Detroit is a lot more lively than it used to be 10 years ago.
This has happened before, Janus.
It has happened before. It happens to many cities around the world. It's called the donut syndrome. If you take Copenhagen, my hometown, for example, in the 1970s, the central part of Copenhagen had 1.2 million inhabitants. By mid-80s, that had dropped to 600,000. And that was when the municipality had almost gone bankrupt, because there was not enough taxpayer in the heart of Copenhagen for them to pay for everything they needed to pay for. So they did competitions. They started cleaning up the harbor. They transformed previous industrial areas into natural assets, etc. And today, in 2021, we're now back at 1.2 million inhabitants in the heart of Copenhagen. It's a vibrant city. I think most people that go there will recognize that it's a completely transformed city.
Interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess digitalization also of the cities will be key. And when you've got a city like this, what you need to do first of all is to use the digital twin, the digital replica of what the city is at a certain point, and then simulate, before taking the decisions, what if I build a new opera house here? What if I build? What if I destroy the building in this place, and simulate the consequences in terms of gas emissions, and of course also simulate the consequences in terms of mobility inside the
Where
city.
are you doing that? Where are you building digital twins for cities too?
In many cities around the world. We started with Rennes, which is a city in the countryside in France, and then we are, when the clients ask us to, use this new digital tool in order to help the decision-making on the future of the cities.
What's the best example of a smart city, do you think, Janus?
I think Singapore is a good example of a smart city where everything is fully integrated, and where you can do a lot of things with your phone. So that would be my best bid.
What for you, when you're, as an engineer, what's the right balance of green to concrete? Do you have a percentage?
I think it's very different from one city to the other. If I take the example of Vienna, you've got 50% of vegetalization. In the city of Riyadh, if we succeed with the Green Riyadh projects, we'll be at 9%. I think it's very difficult to define, I would say, an average. What I would, of course, suggest the cities that are lagging behind is to have, like Saudi Arabia, a plan in terms of the capacity to increase the percentage of the green coverage of cities, and then, of course, implement the right public policies.
Very briefly, what aren't we getting right? What do we need to work harder on?
I think we need to work harder on the fringes. So the intersections between giga projects, we've seen that in Dubai, for example, with many of the master developers, where developments become introverts. They look at themselves. I think we've got to remember that a city the good cities are the connected cities, and therefore connecting developments and connecting neighborhoods is key to the success of a city.
Okay, good city is a connected city. What do we need to do better on, Laurent?
I think we have two challenges. The first one is pace. If you take the example of France, we have achieved half of what we should have achieved in terms of greenhouse gas emissions in cities between 1990 and today, so in more than 30 years. And we need to do the other half in the next 7 years. So there is an issue of pace, and of course there is an issue of financing. I mean, all the studies show that the investment, public plus private, in decarbonization in cities would have to double in China annually and in the US if we want to meet the net zero carbon targets.
Interesting. All right, gentlemen.
Pace and financing.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. That's been a fascinating discussion, and it is still my favorite subject, cities. So thank you for indulging me on that. Thank you to the audience for listening.